Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. As Israel and Hamas negotiate a potential prisoner swap, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister says no people with ties to Canada have been approved to leave Gaza as of yet. The head of the Sexual Assault Center at the University of Alberta has been fired. We will explain why. And we chat with political reporter Brian Lilly about the federal court's decision to strike down the Trudeau government's single-use plastics ban.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Senior officials with Hamas say there could be an agreement soon that would see the terrorist group release hostages it seized on October the 7th. It would be in the form of a prisoner swap for Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel. That is, as high-level government meetings are being held in Israel to discuss a potential prisoner exchange. Israel, the United States, and Qatar, which mediates with Hamas, have been negotiating for weeks now over hostage release that would be paired with a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, along with the entry of more humanitarian aid. More than 30,000 protesters gathered around Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, demanding that Israel do more to have Hamas release the 200-plus hostages. Now, during an interview on TBN Centerpoint, the Jerusalem bureau chief with the Jewish News Syndicate, Alex Trayman, says any hostage swap would mean a temporary ceasefire, which in turn would mean that Hamas could simply reload.
Heard reports over the last several weeks that there could be a deal which would allow for Hamas to release female hostages and children and maybe some elderly in exchange for a cease in the fighting, a temporary truce or pause in the fighting for several days, which would be time that would enable Hamas to rearm itself, to switch its positions on the ground. It was something that could make things very difficult for the IDF once fighting resumes.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says our country expects a deal between Israel and Hamas would include permission for all foreign nationals to leave the Gaza Strip. No Canadians were on today's list of foreign nationals approved to cross into Egypt. Joly says around 200 people with ties to Canada are still on a waiting list to get out. The head of the Alberta Sexual Assault Center at the University of Alberta has been fired. Samantha Pearson, who signed an open letter denying women were raped during the Hamas attacks on October 7th in Gaza, was officially let go from her position. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith was engaged in the university's decision. Now, the Jewish Federation of Edmonton wrote in a social media post, "Shouldn't a sexual assault center believe all victims and not just the non-Jewish ones?" In a statement, University President Bill Flanagan said, quote, "The University of Alberta stands firmly and unequivocally against discrimination and hatred on the basis of religion, race, ethnicity, and other protected categories." Well, you know, it was nice hitting double-digit temperatures here again in Lethbridge. For the third week in November, we'll take it, right? Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, very warm temperatures may be short-lived, however, for much of southwestern Alberta.
Yeah, you're not kidding, Hal. Look at that temperature today. We're looking at 14 degrees, albeit very windy. But yeah, you're right, short-lived. All that is about to change as we're only expecting a daytime high tomorrow of 6 degrees. Now, by the afternoon, that is actually going to drop to -2. Also, we are looking at a chance of the white stuff. Yes, that's right. I said it. 60% chance of flurries by tomorrow afternoon. Those winds also that we were experiencing today, up to 80 kilometers per hour, expected through the evening. Tomorrow morning, we're looking at winds up to 50K, and then they should be lightening up by noon. So, which is a good thing because we definitely don't want blowing snow in the afternoon there. So I'll be back later in the show to tell you how the rest of the week is shaping up.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland presented her government's fall economic statement on Tuesday. She says inflation and a slowing economy continue to put pressure on federal finances. The update included a new goal to keep deficits under 1% of Canada's GDP beginning in the year 2026 and 2027. Now, the federal government also projects the deficit for the current fiscal year to come in around $40 billion, which is around $5 billion more than its spring budget forecast. Freeland says what's encouraging, however, for our country right now is the amount of foreign investment.
In the first half of this year, Canada received the third most foreign direct investment of any country in the entire world. has more investment per capita than any of our G7 allies. More investment than the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, or Japan.
Wow.
And the IMF projects Canada to likewise see the strongest economic growth in the G7 next year.
According to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the budget update shows that spending will increase from $473.5 billion last year to $488.7 billion this year. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre commented on the recent Scotiabank report, which says inflation increased 2% as a direct result of the Trudeau Liberal spending. Poilievre says 7 million Canadians have had to trim back on food because they simply can't afford that many groceries.
And many are cutting homes and forced to live in tents because mortgage rates have risen so fast under this Prime Minister's deficit. Scotiabank now calculates government deficits are adding 2 full percentage points to the rates. That's $700 per month in higher mortgage payments. Next year, $900 billion, the next 3 years, $900 billion of new mortgages, or 2/3 will come up for renewal. We risk a massive default crisis. Will the Prime Minister announce a plan to balance the budget to bring down mortgage rates so Canadians can keep their homes?
For the Conservative politician's approach to facing challenges is always cuts and austerity. He recognizes, like we all do, that Canadians are facing difficult times, and his solution is for the federal government to do less, to invest less in Canadians, to be there less to support Canadians. That is not what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. Over the past number of months, we've announced the construction of over 100,000, 200,000 homes across the country. We're delivering support for people in buying groceries with greater competition, and we're moving forward with clean jobs into the future, whether it's manufacturing with Stellantis or Volkswagen, whether it's resources. We're moving forward to support workers.
Conservative MP John Barlow was joined by a host of farmers on Parliament Hill on Tuesday, urging the passage of Tory Bill C-234, which would give our farmers more of an exemption from the federal carbon tax. Barlow says the tax on natural gas and propane is putting the livelihoods of so many in our agricultural community in jeopardy.
This is a reality in rural communities across Canada, where farmers do not have any other alternatives to heat and cool their barns and dry their grain. They do everything they can to innovate, adapt new technology, and ensure the environmental sustainability of their operations. That is why this common sense Conservative Bill C-234 was introduced, because a tax on farmer is an increase on the cost of food for every single Canadian. As I said, this bill will provide much needed financial relief for our farmers who want to make food more affordable for Canadians in the face of Justin Trudeau's inflationary taxes and deficits. Now, there is already an exemption on gas and diesel for farmers, but Bill C-234 would expand the exemption to natural gas and propane, which are actually cleaner burning fuels. And this will address what I believe was an oversight in the initial price on pollution and carbon tax regulations introduced by this Liberal government.
Now, the legislation bill C-234 is currently at third reading in the Senate. The chair of a taxpayer-funded panel that reviewed Alberta's response to the pandemic is urging the federal Conservatives to use his findings in the next election against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's governing coalition. Preston Manning made the pitch in an email sent to Tory MPs on the same day the report from the panel he chaired was published. The recipients list included Calgary Liberal MP George Chahal. Premier Daniel Smith says she's okay with it, saying that Manning's email was sent from a non-panel email address, adding the more people who see the report's findings, the better. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley says Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre should not bring up the findings of that report during the next election. He says the last thing Canadians want to hear about right now is the COVID-19 pandemic.
If Poilievre is going to go near that sort of thing, he's got to be very careful, because while, yeah, there's a base who are agitated, it's a small group, and the people he needs are the people that he's got on side now. 41% in the last 3 polls. He's got the suburban swing voter mothers coming over. You don't want to scare them away when you're this close to taking power.
Mr. Lilley will also have more details on today's federal fiscal update, which includes $15 billion to boost housing. Watch for that interview coming up later in our broadcast. A Saskatchewan man pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the poisoning of his wife on the family farm in 2020. A judge sentenced 41-year-old Michael McKay to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years in the death of his wife, Cindy McKay, who was just 38 at the time.
If you may have noticed, we're wearing red today to honor Cindy, as that was her favorite color. It has been nearly 4 years since Cindy was murdered, and today we finally got some justice. The terrible things he did to her are finally being told. He has told many lies to many people about what happened to Cindy, so it is a great relief to all of us that the record is finally being set straight. We appreciate not having to go through the stress of a trial. He's a lowlife and a drain on society. Cindy was a truly great person and a wonderful mother to her 3 children. She was kind and compassionate. She loved animals and adopted as many as she could.
The Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs is applauding a move by the Saskatchewan government. Beginning in 2025-2026, the province will adopt mandatory Holocaust education in schools, joining Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. It'll be a compulsory component of the renewed Social Studies 10 curriculum. Now, in a release, CEO and president of the CIJA, Shimon Kofler-Fogel, said, quote, "Combating hate begins with education. The safety of the Jewish community is supported by the understanding of what never again truly means. It's a significant step by the government of Saskatchewan to ensure children in the province grow up knowing what the Holocaust was, how it affected Jews around the world, and how the world learned from the tragic chapter of our history." A company that runs a commercial kitchen at the center of the E. coli outbreak at Calgary daycares has entered a not guilty plea to municipal bylaw charges. The City of Calgary charged Fueling Minds, Inc. and its 2 directors in September with serving food at childcare centers in the city without a food services business license. They faced 12 charges and fines up to $120,000. There were around 446 E. coli cases connected to the outbreak, which lasted around 8 weeks. 39 children and 1 adult were hospitalized. A trial date has been set for September 6th of next year. Human trafficking is a major problem in many regions of the world, including right here in our province. That's according to Paul LaBelle, who's the acting president of the Alberta chapter of Bikers Against Trafficking. LaBelle says we often hear about trafficking taking place in other countries around the world, but it's also a major issue right here in Canada, including here in southern Alberta.
Did you know that 95% or so of the trafficking that happens in Canada, it's not all about immigrants coming over that are being brought in from some of these countries. 95% are Canadian citizens. They're born in Canada. And the thing is, Jeanette, it's right across our nation. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the cities or out in the countryside, and Alberta is one of 5 hotspots in Canada, especially southern Alberta.
Make sure you catch the full informative interview with Paul LaBelle from Bikers Against Trafficking and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. The president of the Alberta branch of the Last Post Fund says their unmarked grave program has run into a problem, but it's a good one. Glenn Miller says his organization's volunteers have discovered many more unmarked graves this year than the program is funded to handle.
Any veteran that lies in an unmarked grave for more than 5 years is eligible through the Last Post Fund under our unmarked grave program to have a military-style marker, either upright, flat, or bronze, whatever is specific to a particular cemetery. These are funded by Veterans Affairs Canada. There's about 600 that they fund every year. We've got a good problem in the sense that we have found many hundreds and even in the thousands now of unmarked graves all across Canada. So we have a backlog of having stones to be installed because there's only so much funding per year.
Now, for more information about the Last Post Fund and how you can donate, be sure to visit their website, lastpostfund.ca. It's that time of year again when we start thinking about the Christmas holidays. Now, beginning Thursday, you'll be hearing the sound of jingle bells as you shop, reminding you to make a donation to the famous Red Kettle. That's when the Salvation Army officially kicks off its annual Christmas Kettle campaign here in Lethbridge at Park Place Mall, both Walmart locations, Superstore, Save on Foods, and Costco. An official kickoff campaign event is also being held this Saturday at the Salvation Army Thrift Store on 2nd Avenue South. Lieutenant Zach Marshall says this Christmas season, they're hoping to raise $100,000 through their kettles and another $150,000 through in-kind giving in just Lethbridge alone.
Obviously, we're taking cash and coins and things like that, but we do have tap as an option. So at all of our kettle locations, you'll be able to tap $5, $10, or $20. Every cent that we raise in Lethbridge stays in Lethbridge for our programming throughout the year. So what do we do? Well, we're very well known for our community outreach, and that's where all that money will go. So at Christmas time, we do our Toys for Tots campaign, where we help families with toys for Christmas. Throughout the year, we do food distribution from our office on 2nd Avenue South. We do Pathway of Hope initiative. We're just kind of all over the place, and we're just trying to help out our community as much as we can.
The Salvation Army's Christmas Kettle campaign began 134 years ago and has grown into one of the world's most significant and recognizable charitable events. You know, if you recently received a parking ticket from Alberta Health Services, there's an opportunity to clear the ticket without paying. AHS is bringing back its Toys for Tickets campaign, which gives people who recently received an AHS parking fine an opportunity to donate a new, unwrapped toy rather than paying the ticket. The Director of Parking for AHS explains what they're looking for.
We are looking for a donation of similar value to the amount owed on the parking ticket. And the recommended ages for donations are newborn to 17. So this could be things like art supplies, Lego sets, any kind of baby toys, journals, activity books, crayons, coloring books, just things of that nature. And yeah, so we're, again, it's a very broad range, or age range that we're looking at. So yeah, whatever someone can donate is very much appreciated.
What a great idea. Parking services will be accepting toy donations as an alternative to paying for tickets issued between November 6th and December 15th. Last year, they collected more than 470 toys province-wide, which was donated to various children's foundations across Alberta. Economic Development Lethbridge hosted a pitch competition looking for ideas to incorporate into the design of the organization's new website, which will be unveiled in the first half of 2024. Now, Tuesday afternoon, a panel of judges heard pitches from 4 candidates. Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Renee Barlow, says her group is looking for ways to have the chooselethbridge.ca website stand out from other economic development websites.
They're going, I've never seen this before, or this information is being presented in a way that I've never seen it highlighted before, and I hadn't thought about my business in this light, or I haven't thought about these considerations when I'm looking to relocate my business, or I haven't thought about these things about how maybe I can grow my business in this area. So we want to have new, innovative ideas that are creating new thought around business development and business attraction.
Really looking forward to seeing what the winning design will look like. What an amazing day in Lethbridge today. We saw over 10 degrees, but sadly, those warm temperatures won't be sticking around much longer. Full weather details are coming up. Hopefully you had a chance to spend a little bit of time outdoors today in Lethbridge. What a gorgeous autumn day. I just wish we had some of those colorful leaves still on the trees, but long gone thanks to our Lethbridge winds here. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the mild temperatures we've been experiencing sadly won't be sticking around much longer?
No, you're right, they won't be. In fact, we could be seeing a chance of flurries tomorrow and even some minus temperatures. Now, that high tomorrow is 6 degrees on Wednesday, but by the afternoon, that could actually plummet to -2. And then as we get into Thursday, we're seeing a daytime high of only -1, mainly cloudy skies. Then we're going to see the sun shine again, but a daytime high of only -2 on Friday, up to 5 degrees for Saturday with sunny skies. Not too bad there. Sunday and Monday, both looking at a high of 7 degrees with a mix of sun and clouds. So the average high for this time of year is 3 degrees, average low -9. 17, that was our high temperature on this day back in 1954. And in 1996, we had the record low, which was -35. Sun rose this morning at 7:52. This evening, we are looking at, I should say this afternoon, we're looking at a sunset of 4:42 p.m. Look at that. We're well into that 4 o'clock hour, 8 hours and 50 minutes of daylight only as we are slowly and surely getting closer to that shorter day of the year, which will be happening at end of December. Okay, so after some evening showers, we're looking at the sky clearing up a bit there for Victoria tomorrow. 10 degrees for a high, 8 degrees expected in Vancouver with a mix of sun and cloud, 20 to 40 K winds. 60% chance of flurries in both Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow, high of -3 in Edmonton, 2 degrees for a high in Calgary expecting those flurries in the afternoon, much the way that Lethbridge is tomorrow. -5 for a high in Saskatoon, -3 in Regina, but both of those cities also looking at wind chill factors that could make it feel like it's in the minuses. Now, Winnipeg looking at a high of 0, mix of sun and cloud. Okay, as we get into the central part of the country there, Toronto looking at periods of rain tomorrow, 8 degrees for a high. Ottawa seeing a freezing rain warning tonight. We could see a buildup of ice of 2 to 4 millimeters, but by tomorrow on Wednesday, we are looking at periods of showers and drizzle. High of 4 degrees. 3 for a high in Montreal. Montreal looking at snow and then changing to rain later on in the day. As we get into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton seeing a high of 4 degrees. And same thing, could see a mix of flurries and shower activity there. Looking at showers though for Halifax with a high 4 degrees. Charlottetown mix of sun and cloud, 3 degrees for a high there, and 0 expected to be the high in St. John's tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Canada's annual inflation rate slowed to 3.1% in October. Statistics Canada says the year-over-year rate was down from 3.8% in September. The drop came as the price drivers paid for gasoline in the month nearly fell about 8% from a year earlier, compared with a 7.5% increase in September. Grocery prices continue to rise faster than overall inflation, up 5.4% last month, but Stats Canada says the pace of increases continue to slow. One of Alberta's largest power generators is betting big on renewable electricity. TransAlta says it will spend $3.5 billion on new clean electricity generating and storage capacity by the end of 2028. The company says within that time frame, 70% of its profits will come from its renewable power assets compared to 40% today. TransAlta has already slashed its greenhouse gas emissions by 76% over 2005 levels by converting its Canadian coal-fired plants to natural gas. Air Canada has rejected blame after a thief walked away with about $24 million worth of gold and cash from its warehouse at Toronto's Pearson Airport back in April. Security services company Bricks claims in a lawsuit that Air Canada was careless when the thief was able to leave with a costly cargo after presenting a phony document. The country's largest airline says, however, it bears no responsibility. It says it fulfilled its carriage contract and denies any careless or improper conduct. Air Canada also says Brinks failed to note the value of the haul on the waybill, and if it did suffer losses, a multilateral treaty known as the Montreal Convention would cap Air Canada's liability. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 136 points on the day to finish at 20,109. The Dow was down 62 points to 35,088. The S&P 500 was down 9 on the day to 4538, and the Nasdaq was down 84 points to 14,199. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 4 cents to 77.75 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to 2.86 US. Gold was up 11 cents to 19.9840 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 23.76 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.98 per bushel, barley's at $6.88, canola's at $16.35, and corn is at $8.25 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down 48 cents to $1.75. Feeder cattle were even at $228.64, and lean hogs December contract was down $2.18 to $68.18. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $72.98 US. Recapping one of our top stories, as Israel and Hamas discuss the potential of a prisoner exchange, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says a deal between Israel and Hamas should include permission for all foreign nationals to leave the Gaza Strip. No Canadians were on today's list of foreign nationals approved to cross into Egypt. Joly says around 200 people with ties to Canada are on a waiting list to get out of the war-torn region. There's a new tax the Trudeau government is contemplating, which has restaurant owners quite concerned. Political columnist Brian Lilly will have details for us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, be sure to visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. Inflation is now sitting at 3.1%, but Stats Canada is warning that food and housing costs remain much higher, not to mention our utility rates. Let's talk about the gas and electricity. Now, to talk about the latest number from Stats Canada is Brian Lilly, political reporter and Sun columnist, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, how does the government agency explain the real difference between overall inflation versus the high cost of food and housing right now?
Food still going up at about 5.8% overall. Fresh vegetables going up 5%. But as you said, 3.1 is the overall inflation rate. Well, that's due to a wild swing in the price of gas. It's part of what drove inflation back up last month. It's why it's down this month. Gas went down again. It has, been wildly fluctuating. I'm filling up for a $1.42 a liter, which we haven't seen in quite a while in this neck of the woods. So you're likely getting even cheaper than that out in Lethbridge. But, that's the wild volatility of gasoline. Now, they do warn, though, that mortgage costs, rent costs, and food continue to rise. They're much higher than the average rate of inflation. So even 3.1%, that's not good. It should be lower than that overall. But when you're talking mortgage rates, I believe last report, they were up more than 30%. Rental rates in some parts of the country going up almost 15% year over year. That becomes untenable for a lot of people. And, we keep hearing about the increase in the cost of food. That's part of the whole debate around Bill C-234, the campaign that Pierre Poilievre has started to remove the remaining bits of the carbon tax from farm inputs. So, the government shouldn't be doing a victory lap right now. Last time inflation went down like this, Chrystia Freeland said, oh, look, see, our policies are working. No, it was just the price of gas going down. Food's still going up, rent's going up. Everything's fine as long as you don't need a place to live or you don't need to eat.
My family was out shopping the other day at a grocery store here in Lethbridge, and we saw a roast for $70. Brian, $70 for a roast. And the guy that was beside us looked at the roast and yelled out, "Are you nuts?"
Well, I'm hoping it was enough to feed 3 families, because
nope.
that is an outrageous price. I was just in the grocery store yesterday, and an item that I don't buy on a weekly basis is just a bottle of honey, just normal Billy B type honey. And it was $13.99 for something that you used to get at a regular price of $9.99. You'd get it on sale once in a while, cheaper than that. That's just in 2 years it's gone up like that, Hal.
That's amazing. Brian, the federal fiscal update was released today, which includes about $15 billion to boost housing supply in the country. Now, you say, however, that this measure really won't help the middle class much.
Yeah, the big problem with the housing crisis is a lot of it is, can a middle class family buy a home anymore? What we have taken for granted for so many decades in this country is that you get a good job, you work hard, you save some money, you can get a down payment and buy a house. Well, just like all the other efforts that the federal government has been putting in, this is aimed at low income, affordable rental housing. Now, that's not to say, that this is not a good program. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, we don't know for sure. They're going to put forward $15 billion that developers can borrow from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation at good rates to encourage them to build this type of housing. But that's not the type of housing that people are looking for when, they want a place that they can buy. This is, again, densified urban living, which is fine. That's how I live in downtown Toronto. That's not for everybody. People want a house. They want a little backyard for their kids, for the dog. And once again, this doesn't do that. The federal government is focusing almost exclusively on low income, geared to income, and affordable housing. Again, an important piece of the puzzle, but they're not doing anything that will help your kids or my kids buy that first home.
Yeah, what about for the rest of us? It's the same thing when they were talking about, eliminating the carbon tax, which they went forward with home heating oil. What about the rest of us that use natural gas, right? Yeah, what about the rest of us, Brian? Now, while the Trudeau government says they're working to bring down inflation, it was also revealed that they may add to inflation concerns as they're looking at a tax hike restaurant owners are not happy about.
Yeah, this is the annual escalator tax. So in 2017, they increased the excise tax on beverage alcohol, so all wine, beer, and spirits, by 2%. And then they said, and we'll increase it this way every year tied to the consumer price index or the inflation rate. Well, last year, that was going to mean a 6.3% hike on beer, wine, and spirits. You might remember the radio ads that came out with Bob and Doug McKenzie saying, stop hosing us, you hosers. There was a big pushback from the restaurant industry, from brewers and vintners. And, well, just about a week and a half ago, they revealed that it's going to be 4.7% this year, unless, of course, they go in and cap it. That's what they did last year. They said, no, we'll cap it at 2%. They haven't indicated what they're doing with that yet. So if it does go up by 4.7%, Restaurants Canada, other industry groups are warning about job losses, about places closing. It may not sound like much, but we were just talking about the price of food going up.
Yeah.
Well, so you're a restaurant. You're dealing with increased labor costs. You're dealing with the increase in the cost of food, the increase in the cost of utilities and everything else. And then the government comes along, and on the one thing that helps you turn that profit, go from just making it to making a profit, is selling beer, wine, and mixed drinks. They're going to put an almost 5% tax on that. That is inflationary, and that is punishing the hospitality industry. Canadian Chamber of Commerce, just one of many groups, saying, you know what? Stop with the annual increases. Now's not the time.
Brian, the federal court struck down the ban on single-use plastics, calling it overly broad and beyond the government's mandate. So please tell me that means I can finally enjoy my A&W root beer in a plastic straw, no longer a paper straw. Because I'm telling you, those paper straws disintegrate within 30 seconds.
Well, as much as I love A&W, Hal, that's one of the companies that even if the plastic straws were allowed again, I don't think that they would be putting them back in, given how they operate. There's going to be a lot of back and forth on this. Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, announced this week that, yeah, they're going to challenge that federal court ruling all the way to the Supreme Court. The federal court said that the ban and how they structured it was overly broad, went beyond their mandate, and so it was struck down. But it hasn't that. The law is still in effect as this process carries out. So, yeah, trying to get those plastic forks when you've got a big outdoor barbecue that you're trying to feed a bunch of people at. No, you're going to be stuck with the little bamboo ones. And yes, you're going to be stuck with the paper straws. Or, my bugaboo now is, as someone who walks all over, I'll walk home after this and I might stop and say, oh, I want to pick something up. Well, there's no bags in the store unless you want to buy your 800th reusable one. So, this is the type of thing that it's an irritant to Canadians. But I don't think that this is going anywhere anytime soon. But I'm with you on the straws.
Our Prime Minister was in San Francisco recently, Brian, for the APEC meeting, and you say it really wasn't a good trip for him. He was snubbed on another meeting, and another political leader actually made fun of his socks?
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, one of the most powerful people in the Democratic Party in the United States right now, and a man who, if Joe Biden, there's all this talk of, is Biden fit to run? Well, if Biden doesn't run, if he's somehow removed from the ticket, Gavin Newsom very much might be the next president of the United States, or he might run the next time. So, just to point out that this is a powerful guy, this is an important guy. And California is almost the size of Canada, population and GDP-wise. And this Trudeau sits down with him and immediately starts talking about his socks in front of the cameras. So this is the opening of the meeting. He's like, hey, I think you gave me these Golden Gate Bridge socks. And Newsom says, you're still doing the sock thing? Have you ever been caught in black socks? And he honestly looked perplexed by him. It's not good when people are laughing at you and not with you, Hal.
Yeah.
But on the more serious note, Joe Biden pulled together a number of countries, I think the United States and 12 others, trying to have discussions about counterbalancing against China in the Asia-Pacific region economically. Canada didn't even get invited. We weren't even asked to go to the meeting. The Trudeau government, once again, trying to downplay this. It's not a big deal. Well, we're not invited to that. We're not invited to the call on how to deal with Israel and Hamas. We're not invited to the 3 eyes instead of the 5 eyes on security We're not invited into the nuclear sub program that the Australians and the Americans and the Brits are involved in. We keep getting excluded. Why? They don't take Justin Trudeau or his socks seriously.
Wow. Brian, amid rampant anti-Semitism on Canadian streets and university and college campuses, along with more reports of increased Islamophobia, the federal government is promising that their online harms bill is still a priority. But let me ask you something. Do they actually have a timeline, and how broad will it be?
They have no timeline, and there's lots of worries about how broad it will be, because they've signaled that they want to go into areas that, quite frankly, I'm worried would, delve into curbing freedom of speech, freedom of expression, to the point where if the government simply doesn't like what you're saying, that they would come after you. Look, we've had the hate preacher, in my view, in Montreal, was calling for Allah to kill all the Zionists. Well, I think that crosses a line, but that was almost a month ago. The guy hasn't been arrested. They say they're investigating. Well, what's to investigate? He posted the video of him saying this in the streets from multiple angles. He recorded it. He posted it. By the way, he says, "Oh no, I wasn't calling for anyone to go and harm anyone. I was calling for God to do it. So that's not incitement to violence." What a bizarre world. So, they can't deal with clear incidents like this, and now they want to expand it. And there is a lot of worry that this is going to go beyond what should be there and start messing up the internet in the way that they have with C11 and C18. So, got to be very careful with this, but they do admit it's complex. They do admit that they're under pressure to do something, but that they have no idea at what point that will be. They promised it in 2019, by the way, and here we are at the end of 2023.
Preston Manning released his report into our province's COVID-19 response recently, and now he's saying that the federal Conservatives should really use the report to attack the record of the Liberal NDP coalition. Now, Brian, you say that's an offer that federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre should reject, stay away from. Why do you say that?
Because my sense of looking at a few elections that have happened since the end of the pandemic is that people don't want to talk about the pandemic anymore. It was a painful time. It was an awful time. They want to forget that it happened, and they don't want to go back to those days. Danielle Smith, when she was relitigating the pandemic leading up to the election, she was neck and neck with Rachel Notley. When she stopped talking about the pandemic, talked about the economy, talked about other issues that Albertans cared about, she went ahead and she ended up winning the election. Doug Ford here in Ontario, the Liberals and the NDP opposition tried to relitigate the pandemic, and that was more than a year ago. That was June 2022, and people didn't want to hear it. There was a post-election post-mortem, one of these events where the top insiders from all the campaigns came together, and the people representing both the Liberal and the NDP party here said even our voters recoiled at that. So if Poilievre is going to go near that sort of thing, he's got to be very careful, because well, yeah, there's a base who are agitated. It's a small group, and the people he needs are the people that he's got on side now. 41% in the last three polls. He's got the suburban swing voter mothers coming over. You don't want to scare them away when you're this close to taking power.
Yeah, I pray that we never have to go through a pandemic like that ever again. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, ever since the Sound of Freedom movie came out, more and more people are becoming aware of the horrible reality of human trafficking. Today's guest is part of an organization that is trying to do their part to put a stop to it. Paul LaBelle joins us from Lethbridge. He is the acting president for the Alberta chapter of Bikers Against Trafficking. Welcome to Bridge City News, Paul. So great to have you on today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you.
First of all, tell us what the Bikers Against Trafficking organization is and maybe how it began.
Sure. Well, we're not an MC, a motorcycle club, or an RC, riding club. We're an organization. We're simply everyday people who share their love of riding motorcycles and have answered the call for a higher purpose. So we are the Canadian division of an organization that is headquartered in Lake Mary, Florida. We're a small group of approximately 30 members based in southern Alberta and southern BC. A team of dedicated men and women who volunteer their time and finances to help break the chains of human trafficking. We do this through education and bringing awareness to everyday people, spreading the word that sexual exploitation and modern day slavery is not acceptable in our communities, our province, and of course, our nation. We hope to expand further into other parts of Canada as our membership grows. So each member, just so you know, each member they have to undergo a criminal background check as well as a vulnerability sector screening. And this is necessary to ensure that our members or prospective members don't have a criminal history of sexual offenses. And we provide a training video as well that was created for each member that must take it, which outlines our mission, our goals, and our biker code. Our mission is to defend those who cannot defend themselves and help eradicate human trafficking one person at a time. It's really quite amazing how many people have no knowledge of human trafficking or no idea how bad this heinous crime has become.
Yeah, a big time. Now, I know there's a lot of more motorcycle organizations that are kind of doing good for the community and whatnot. It might be to do away with that stigma of the big bad biker or whatever. But why human trafficking specifically for your group? What's that intrinsic motivator?
Well, like you said, there's other organizations that are doing awesome work, regarding child abuse and, the whole thing about the riding community is that, as the eyes and ears of our communities, we are in a unique position to converse with others of like mind. We can go where others do not or cannot go. We attend several events throughout southern Alberta and British Columbia, such as, classic car show and shines, motorcycle shows, charity events, toy runs, and many other events. And during these events, we're spreading the word about human trafficking in our community. And we're also on the lookout, scanning the crowds, hoping to spot traffickers and their victims. Wow. When we do. And yeah, so it's not just a joyride type of thing. But the thing is, we really do try to involve the riding community. And there's many, riders throughout Alberta and other provinces that we connect with as well. And I tell you, they're not big bad people. I always say to somebody, especially to my granddaughters, my oldest granddaughter rides with me all the time to a lot of these events. Her moniker is Shadow, me and my shadow, and so I've always told her that, when you're not around with me, whatever, and something is happening, and you see a biker, out on the street or some bikers out there, if there's no police around or whatever like that, go to them and they'll help you.
That's a really good point. No, absolutely. So getting back to what your goal is, human trafficking, how widespread is this globally?
Well, that's that's almost like an iceberg. You really don't know until you get further into it, how bad it is. And so, it truly is a real global problem. And it's much worse than most people know. It's actually, this is a frightening, and the magnitude of the problem is actually overwhelming. And some of the statistics that I'll be presenting, are from, Stats Canada, certainly the RCMP in the U.S. National Center on Sexual Exploitation, even UNICEF and United Nations. And these stats are estimates at best, because human trafficking, it's an underground criminal activity. It's hidden from plain sight. Yeah. Therefore making it very difficult to get accurate numbers of what really happening and how many victims are involved. And we also get some of our data too, from other organizations of like mind, such as Not in My City and the Joy Smith Foundation and that, but the illegal transport of individuals by force or deception, for human trafficking is totally a global problem that's affecting people of all ages. And according to United Nations and the U.S. National Center of Sexual Exploitation, they're saying online exploitation is on the rise exponentially around the globe. And much of this increase has been attributed to COVID because during the pandemic, people, especially kids, were gravitating to social media to stay connected with the outside world. And
they were
and
online.
it is, that's right. And it's estimated that over 40 million people are trafficked every year globally. And you put this into perspective, that is more than the population of Canada.
I know. It's unreal. And, I think like the first thing that comes to most of our minds when we think of human trafficking is, of course, the sex trade. So, but, I understand that there are other angles to this, right? So can you maybe share a bit about some of the other kinds of human trafficking that take place?
Yeah, it's modern day slavery, but a large in some of the other countries, and I'll tell you, every continent in the world is affected by it, and some more so with forced labor than others. But in the United States and Canada, I would say the large part of it, is 93 or 94% is actual for sexual exploitation.
Yeah, definitely. What's the average age of the victims of human trafficking? Are they mostly young, kind of the more vulnerable?
The average is about 45% are between the ages of 18 and 24, and about 25% are under 16, but that is between 12 and 14. But I'll tell you, there are children in Canada that are even at the age of 4 or 7 that is being trafficked. And I can tell you not from personal experience, but a really good friend of ours, of my youngest daughter, and she was trafficked at the age of 4. And her parents never knew anything about it because, these guys are so skilled at what they do.
It's hard not to call them what they are, right?
Scum of the earth.
Right. Yeah, and Paul, and it's interesting that you mentioned Canada because we do normally think of other countries like Thailand or Mexico, where it's kind of more common, more prevalent, more in your face. But it does happen in Canada and even right here in southern Alberta, and it's so difficult to believe, isn't it?
Well, most people have no idea. They do think it happens in Mexico and Thailand and South Africa, and the thing is, it happens right here in our own backyards. And I mentioned earlier that about 93% are sexual exploitation, but did you know that 95% or so of the trafficking that happens in Canada, it's not all about immigrants coming over that are being brought in from some of these countries. 95% are Canadian citizens. They're born in Canada. And the thing is, Jeanette, it's right across our nation. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the cities or out in the countryside, and Alberta is one of 5 hotspots in Canada, especially southern Alberta. That blows my mind.
Wow.
And a lot of people I talk to, they just look at me. And when we did an event up in New Horizon Mall in February, and it was a motorcycle show, Move Your Soul, and we were one of 60 vendors that were there. It was kind of an impromptu thing, but it was a 3-day event. We had thousands and thousands of people coming through. We were so busy, it was amazing. And I'll tell you, I would say 75% of the people we spoke to had no idea. And even some of those, they looked at our tent, had, Bikers Against Trafficking. They thought we were against, drug trafficking.
Sure, and I can see somebody thinking that too. Yeah, Completely. Now, you guys obviously do fundraising and you raise awareness like you were doing there. And I know that you help other groups based out of Lethbridge, like Not for Sale. And I just recently had the privilege of speaking with them about their new safe shelter in Mexico, and they're planning to build some in Canada as well. So is your organization getting involved in a more direct way to protect victims or potential victims locally?
Yeah, I really can't comment too much on that, but we do, work, closely with Not for Sale. We know the leaders of the organization and the founders very, very closely. We know them very well, and personal friends of ours, and we'll be there to help and assist.
Yeah.
And we have done that in the past,
Okay.
and where there was, someone who was trying to get out, a 15-year-old girl was trying to get out of it, and she was able to escape, and she made contact with them. And so what we did was we provided security and surveillance at the meeting place. And that's about all I can tell you about that.
Yeah.
But, they do an awesome work, Not for Sale, as well as other organizations, such as Not in My City. I mean, Paul Brandt, he brought that thing together, and he's responsible for this action coalition type of thing in Alberta, and then Joy Smith Foundation. Joy was the one who really was able to, from a high school teacher in Manitoba, was able to eventually get into the Manitoba legislature, then ended up becoming an MP in Ottawa. And she was the one who wrote the bills to have give more power, to the courts and to the authorities, right across Canada.
We're running out of time here, but really quickly, I wanted to kind of get back to like the more educational piece and practical. So what are these criminals looking for in vulnerable victims? Who are they targeting? How are they luring them? What can people do to prevent it from happening to them or somebody that they know?
Yeah, well, what they're looking for is, they're typically targeting, vulnerable populations. They're looking for individuals who may feel hopeless or are struggling with dependencies, and they often target people with financial instability, or those in poverty. They may have and these people may have any of the following. There's substance abuse or disorders, and homelessness. Living out in the streets, runaways because the kids weren't happy at home. Probably for some really good reasons. Unstable housing, language barriers, mental health disorders, criminal records, social misfits.
Okay.
So, the traffickers, they prey on a person's desperation and promising them independence or a way out. And their recruitment begins early and may involve several different members of the trafficking team.
Oh, that's just terrible. So if a viewer knows of someone who might be a victim or who this might be happening to, what is like the right way to respond? Because these are really dangerous people that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's you're right. The thing is, a lot of these traffickers, they're in their mid-20s, and it's not just men. It's also women who were trafficked at a younger age, that they became so reliant and dependent on these traffickers that they're actually doing this work for them. But if you're out in public, and especially if you see, I don't know if anybody has seen the signal like this, and we should be teaching our kids and schools and that about that hand signal. If anybody spots that in an airport or in a mall or something like that, or walking down the streets, I would say take a picture with everybody's got smartphones, so take a picture of the youngster and the person that they're with, and if they're walking to the car, get a license plate number, phone 911, and report it right away. If there's any suspicion, we can contact organizations such as, there's hotlines too, that are out there, and certainly if you want to contact us, we have our email batalberta at gmail.com. You can contact us, and we'll look into it further, see what can be done. You know.
Yeah, that's good that you said that, because I was going to ask if people want to learn more about your organization too. What can they do? Do you guys have a website or a Facebook page or something?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page that we have, which is Bikers Against Trafficking, all one word, .ca. Our .org actually is our headquarters down in Florida, and normally they have a connection there for the Canadian side, but they're going through a revamp right now, redesigning it, so it's not hooked up right now. But yeah, certainly you can reach us that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's some practical advice there. Thank you so much for being with us today, Paul, and for sharing more about this horrible thing that goes on, and for the work that you do as well. Thank you for that.
Well, we're just a small cog, I always compare it to some of our guys, our people, is that we're just a drop in an ocean. Because it's very difficult, and all we can do is bring awareness. And I mean, you mentioned at the beginning about that movie, The Sound of Freedom, and we stood outside here in Lethbridge at the movie mill. A bunch of us had stood outside after some of the ones, the different shows at different times, handing out our brochures and to people as they were coming out, and not one person rejected it. In fact, when I left the building and I went out to my bike, I had about 7 or 8 people standing around my bike waiting for me to talk to me afterwards, And so, I mean, it was a good movie. I think it was timely, and it just falls in line with what other organizations are doing. But to have someone, like Jim, to produce that, that film based on Tim Ballard's story. I mean, it wasn't in so much filmed about in the United States. It was in other countries. But the thing is bringing awareness. Anything we can do to bring awareness. That's how we combat this thing.
Absolutely, 100%. Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, hope I could help.
Absolutely. Paul Lavelle is the acting president for the Bikers Against Trafficking Alberta chapter. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.